everybody, it's me, Bumble, and I was going to say happy Halloween month, but by the time I learned how to use all of this editing stuff, it is now December 15th, so happy holidays! Today we are taking an old project and giving it a little bit of a makeover. This project was experimental for me and I thought I would leave in the errors to show you guys my complete process and that it's okay to make mistakes. And before we start, I want to remind you that while this process works for me, there may be something that works better for you, and that's great. Experiment and find out what you like the best. There are tons of reasons why you might want to make over an older piece. Sometimes your skills improve, your style changes, or you just change your mind about a choice you made on the original work. This can be done either by completely starting over and referencing the original, or by working right on top of the original, which is what I'll be doing with this piece. Let's first take a look at this drawing and do the step I always start with when approaching an art makeover. I first need to decide what I like about this piece and what I would want to change. So the things I like about it, I like the mark making that I chose for each bat, the placement of the bats, and the overall style is working well. The things that I would want to change, I want to make these bats more visible. The assignment was to work in graphite, but it's really hard to see the bats on the gray background. So I'm thinking maybe pen would make it more visible. I want to fill in a little bit of this negative space with something a little more visually interesting. The big writing at the bottom, I think I'll take that out. And I want it to look more like a journal page when it's done. And with that, I can start working. As you can see, I already roughed up the edges of the artboard for the original piece. Now I just really want to bring out that look, so I'm going to distress it some more. The first thing I try is adding dark brown watercolor to the scratched up edges. I do this in layers, brushing on the paint, letting it soak, then dabbing the extra water off. My hope is that by doing this, the pigment in the paint will stain the paper, and I can use that to build up color. Unfortunately, while it did stain a little bit, the edges still looked almost the same. I then realized the problem. This artboard is way too slick for watercolors. There is no tooth to this paper. So instead, it's on to plan B. I found this really neato photo album at the thrift store and remembered the journal-like paper inside. I can use paper like this in a collage style to get that worn down look that I want. However, I want this book to stay intact for a future project, so instead, let's make our own journal paper. For this, I'm going to try using a cookie pan, printer paper, cheap coffee mix, and watercolors. Mix up some of the coffee mix with warm water and pour it into a cool cookie pan. Then, in goes the paper. At first, I tried to keep my hands dry before deciding to just full send it, because art is messy, right? Crinkle up the paper and let it soak in the coffee for a bit. When I think it's been long enough to stain, I pull the paper out and set it on a cooling rack, adding a few more crinkles. While that dries, I start soaking a couple more papers. While the first paper is still damp, I add black and brown watercolors until I'm happy with how it looks. Keep in mind that the paper will very slightly darken in color as the coffee dries. I like to keep a hairdryer nearby to speed this part up. I continued the steps until I made 6 journal pages, which ended up being way too many. Turns out I only needed 1. When they're all dry, you'll have these really old and tattered, cool looking papers to use. The next thing I do is section off parts of the artboard where I want to attach the papers. But before I start gluing, I need to take care of the number one change I wanted to make, the visibility. Because the drawing was done in graphite on gray artboard, it's so hard to see these bats. I decide to knock out the pointillism bat first because that's the one I know will probably take the longest. Using a micron pen, I go over the entire drawing in ink, and soon you can see the hundreds of tiny dots make up a cute little bat. I'm already very happy with how this looks. I feel like I can actually see it now. Also, something I wasn't expecting, because the ink dots don't line up perfectly with the pencil dots, it gives a fuller and fuzzy look, which I quite like. Next up is the diagonal line bat, and then the realistic bat. I'm trying really hard to keep from smudging the pen, but the artboard is so slick I end up with a few smudges despite my efforts. Luckily, they should be covered up by the journal paper, so it's all good. After doing the crisscross applesauce bats in the top left, I move on to the anatomy sketch bat in the center. I also go around and darken up this lettering. I left the ink to dry overnight and then it was time for the journal paper. Clamping it down, I trimmed the paper to frame the bat drawings. Then it's a lot of readjusting, gluing, more readjusting, and more gluing. I also go ahead and cover up the big letters at the bottom. I just don't really like them that much. And here's what it looks like all glued on. Finally, I want to create the illusion that these sketches are overlapping each other and the journal paper. So I'm going to take pen and watercolors to cast shadows and add even more distressing. I'm also going to add some lettering to the other sketches off camera to match the one in the center. And with that, this makeover is complete. I had a ton of fun experimenting and working on this piece, and I love how it turned out. I think it's safe to say that years later, this piece is finally complete. Thank you guys so much for letting me share my art and process with you. I hope it helps someone else on their own project. Can't wait to see what you guys come up with. I found this really neato photo